Greg Peterson here, and I want to thank you for listening to the Urban Farm Podcast. We wouldn't be able to keep doing these great shows without you. So as a token of my appreciation, I'd like to offer you access to a list of our top 10 episodes I personally find most inspiring. If you enjoy the Urban Farm Podcast but don't have time to listen to every one, then you will love this list. Although all our guests have great information to offer, if you are short on time, these 10 are must-listens. To get access to the top 10 most inspiring podcast episodes, text FARMER to 44222. That's FARMER to 44222. And enjoy listening.
You're listening to the Urban Farm Podcast, your partner in the Grow Your Own Food revolution. Whether you've just been introduced to urban farming or you're a lifelong advocate, we're sure you'll leave feeling more informed, equipped, and empowered to dig deeper into the soil of your local food economy. With you every step of the way, here's your host, Greg Peterson.
Today on the Urban Farm Podcast, we have Jayson Matthews of Valley of the Sun United Way to talk about his experience with solutions to hunger. Jayson is currently the Director of Ending Hunger for the Valley of the Sun United Way and has been with the organization since September 2014. Before joining the United Way, Jayson served as Executive Assistant to former Mayor Neil Guiliano, as the Assistant Director and Chief Program Officer of Tempe Community Council, and as the Chief Development Officer for United Food Bank. Jayson earned a Bachelors of Arts in English Literature and Political Science from the University of Arizona in 1999 and a Master's in Public Administration from Arizona State University in 2003. He is also a graduate of Tempe Leadership, a trained facilitator specializing in nonprofit board development and community development, and recently became a certified poverty coach. He is a fierce advocate for human services and public service and demonstrates this through his volunteer work on various municipal boards, commissions, and nonprofit boards in Phoenix and Tempe. In his free time, he enjoys going on adventures with his dear wife and partner, Emma, and their adorable dog, Daisy. Welcome to the show today, Jayson.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for being here. So I shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at now?
Certainly. Again, it is a pleasure to be on your show. I have been listening to it and learning a lot, and I feel that my intro and my path it pales in comparison to some of your other guests. So I'm just going to try to keep up as best as I can. The path to really fill in the blank that's not really captured in that shameless bio that you had the pleasure of hearing it's really a little bit more of my how I got here through my upbringing. There is, I'm just a normal Tucson kid that was raised by a single mom who had me when she was 17 years old and never met my father and didn't have any brothers or sisters. And it was, together and through those experiences that formed how I interact with community, how I interact with social services in the nonprofit sector, in schools and institutions of faith, and how I interact with food. And it is through that work that I do now. I try to honor that history that got me to this particular point. I think about, in everything I do, how can I help, and honor my mother's memory, those folks that taught me how to cook in giant big meals, even though we were all kind of thrown together, and that's something that I continue to think about in every day that I work.
Nice. So your job title is Director of Ending Hunger. Tell me about that.
Well, the director of World Peace was taken, and I thought that it was, in all seriousness, it's a wonderful opportunity here at the Valley of Sun United Way to have a laser sharp focus on the work around food insecurity, which is a fancy way of saying hunger, for those in need within Maricopa County. And what I have the honor of doing is working with an amazing team of professionals that look at the issue of hunger and food insecurity in the context of how we essentially break the cycle of poverty here in Maricopa County. And we know that, if we don't take care of those basic human needs, and especially around food, that it's going to be really difficult to make a dent in homelessness, to increase financial stability in families and individuals, to ensure that little kids have the opportunity to learn as much as they can in school and to be successful. And so we work to make a dent within a very important issue that is very prevalent, unfortunately, in Arizona and in Maricopa County.
You said a lot there, and I want to unpack it a little bit. You said food insecurity. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Certainly. Food insecurity is essentially how hunger is defined by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or the USDA. And instead of starvation, which is, I think everyone can understand when people have zero access to 0 calories, food insecurity is essentially not knowing where your next meal is going to come from.
Right.
So if you woke up today and you knew that you were going to have breakfast, then more likely than not, you are food secure. And if you woke up today and you didn't know if you were going to have breakfast, then essentially you are operating in that sense of insecurity, and that then generates other hardships that come with that. And heck, Greg, I would even pose to you and to anyone listening that, just imagine, what it would be if you woke up and you didn't know where your meal was going to come from. What would be the first couple of things that you would think about?
I don't even know where to go with that, because it's so unimaginable for me to think that I wouldn't have food. When you ask that question, it's like, all right, my brain kind of went in 16 different directions. It's like, how do I go about answering that? I don't know how to do that. Yeah.
And I think that a lot of folks, they're in the exact same spot. And actually go back to, my upbringing and with my mom, that led to a lot of anxious and hard moments and very difficult conversations. My mom and my story is just one of many stories that explains in which, when you have, a person that wakes up, a single mom with one child, they're waking up with a lot of anxiety and already waking up with a lot of stress. And so how you approach your meals, if you do have one, or even the hecticness or the stress to get to that first meal, it creates that very basic act of eating into a very stressful and anxious kind of moment that if you're facing that, it's really difficult for you to be your very best student or your very best employee.
Yeah. I knew someone once that she grew up with 7 brothers. It was 7 brothers and her. And, they while they had food, they didn't have lots. So it was always interesting. For her, it was, there's no way she's going to share food. The food that arrived on her plate was her plate food. And I kept assuring her, you know what, there's more where that came from, but it became ingrained in her. There's just, it seemed almost like a protection mechanism. So it was
indeed.
I guess that's probably as close as I've been to experience anything like that.
Yeah, and it's what we've seen in children especially is that they learn at a very young age, especially if they're living in a household with food insecurity, and especially those that have chronic food insecurity. And that's defined by essentially needing to access emergency food systems like food banks or soup kitchens 3 out of 4 times in 1 month, or
Wow.
7 out of 12 times in a year. Mm-hmm. They always need those kinds of services. That those kids, they're pretty resilient, and you'll see that those kids start to develop hoarding, self-defense mechanisms, the need to gorge themselves when they do have food, and it's a completely different arrangement.
Yeah.
Heck, I see my wife Emma, who's a preschool teacher, and she teaches 3 and 4-year-olds, and she knows, those kids that haven't eaten that well or haven't eaten at all on Monday morning because they're just gorging themselves on that first meal of the day.
Yeah.
And then they're holding some snacks in their pocket for later. And that's what food insecurity does to individuals.
Yeah. I can imagine the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So why is hunger such an important question to be asking and addressing, even in our industrial society?
Great question. I get it a lot, and I'm so grateful that people are asking the question. I think a challenge with hunger is that there's a lot of assumptions that come with it. And, I'm starting to get old enough to where I remember, even as a kid, even though I was food insecure, I remember seeing those commercials with Sally Struthers, for 20 cents or for 1 quarter a day, you could feed a child. And those programs are instrumental, and they help to define what a lot of folks' opinions of what hunger looks like here in the United States, which is primarily a starvation-related environment. Mm-hmm. And again, starvation is not food insecurity. And why hunger is so incredibly important, an issue for all of us to consider in the United States and in Arizona, is that it impacts everything we do. It's almost like asking the question of, why is eating important to people?
Right.
You get a really quick answer. Well, without that, things get a little more complicated.
Yeah, not much of a future there.
And so for our work here in Maricopa County and in Arizona, we look at addressing hunger and food insecurity is instrumental to everything we do at the United Way and how to help people be their absolute very best. And if we can take care of that basic thing, making sure that people have a healthy meal and not having to worry every single day or every single meal that this may be your last, and you don't know when the next one's going to come from, then we can work on the harder things. We can actually tackle the harder aspects of financial stability or housing or counseling, making sure that you're being successful in your job, or making sure that you're going to be successful in school. And I always challenge people that, think about times in your life, those great times, those celebratory times, but even those hard times, funerals and hard talks, how many of those times in your life did not involve a meal?
All right.
I can't think of very many of them. Yeah. And that is, for me, when you can take care of the meal and have, especially if it's made together and with love, that creates a space for those important talks. And for a lot of people that are struggling, especially people that are food insecure and that have the crushing daily life of poverty, you need to create that space to have the hard, big talks that you can use to heal, to rebuild, to gain confidence, to then move forward. And I think we naturally do that anyways, but if there's a lack of food or the lack of good food, those conversations in that space that just doesn't exist.
Right.
And it's very hard to tackle those wicked problems.
Yeah. So how wide-ranging is an issue like hunger in the typical large city and then in smaller cities?
Great question. I'll give you some big numbers, and I like to apologize. I get really nerdy really quick, so please feel free to poke fun at me. But you're looking at in the state of Arizona, and I'll just kind of use some bigger numbers. That's about 1.1 million Arizonans out of a population of about 6.5 million that are food insecure. In the United States, you're looking at about 1 in 4 children, 1 in 5 adults, and 1 in 7 seniors that are facing some kind of food insecurity throughout the year. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
How that plays off into urban versus rural areas is a pretty complicated answer because some urban areas have a lot more services, and some rural areas, they may not necessarily have as many services, but they might be a closer-knit community that actually share food a little bit. They know their neighbors a little bit.
Right.
What we have the information for Maricopa County, which includes the Phoenix metropolitan area of about 4.5 million people or so, is that about 600,000 individuals within the county are food insecure. And that creates a big ripple effect. Yeah, it's incredible numbers, isn't it?
Yeah. That's like 1/6 of the population is food insecure in the state of Arizona.
That is exactly right.
Are you
and
finding
those are big, shocking numbers?
Yeah. Are you finding the same numbers elsewhere in the country and in the world?
Yes.
Well, yeah.
And again, it's more if you asked the right question, which was the industrialized world.
Mm-hmm.
There is, in the United States, we try to compare to other industrialized countries. What's interesting about the United States in comparison to other industrialized countries is that we have a Western-style diet, and we have some different expectations when it comes to food that some of our friends and in other industrialized countries, especially in Europe, don't have. So, for example, we in our country in the United States, we like to have food to be pretty cheap and pretty fast and pretty tasty, which unfortunately includes a lot of salt and sugar in those particular meals. And that then creates a different issue that compounds not just being hungry, but also this sense of being malnourished. We have a big issue. Food insecurity and malnourishment are completely linked. And because of, you see this all the time with, fast food diets and those kinds of things, it becomes an issue on when you expect to have strawberries to be, $1 for 5 pounds, and you should get them 365 days a year. That's a bad understanding and relationship with food.
Right.
And that's unfortunately the kind of environment that we have to work in within the United States, which makes the tackling of this issue that much harder.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So you used the word malnourishment in the last part of the conversation. How is food insecurity and malnourishment, how are they connected?
Malnourishment and food insecurity are absolutely connected, especially in the United States and in Arizona, because of poverty. And poverty is a little different within the United States than in other countries. And if you look at just the technical definition of the amount of income that you have, we are actually pretty rich in comparison to other countries. Mm-hmm. Yet at the same time, our relationship and how we characterize those that are living in poverty is much harsher than any other country. The issue of of shame and guilt are used a lot as a deterrent to keep people from being poor. If you listen to political campaigns and if you listen to even the modern media, being poor is not seen as a positive thing. Yeah. People are called lazy, or they say that they choose to do that way and they're not motivated and all these different things. And that just gets thrown around as part of the nomenclature. Yeah. Unfortunately, poverty and obesity in the United States are linked. And it is because, cheap food unfortunately tends to be not good for you food. Yeah. And if you are in a way in which you are, working a minimum wage job, which can be $7.50 in some cities. Heck, if you're lucky enough to live in a city where even you're earning $10 an hour or even $12 an hour, that's still it still doesn't provide a lot of income to pay for that good quality food. Plus, a lot of folks that are working those hourly wage jobs, they may not necessarily have the expertise or just a common knowledge on how to cook that wonderfully nutritious food. Yeah. And so you have both this time deficit and you have a cost deficit that makes for a perfect environment for people to eat really, really poorly. And unfortunately, there's some contributing factors against us in the healthy food movement that make our work even more difficult. We don't have the advertising budget of a big fast food company, for example. Yeah. It'd be great if we did. I would love to have the advertising budget of a big fast food company to advertise fruits and vegetables. Right. Exactly. And since we don't, those kinds of marketing efforts just compound folks all throughout this country, and especially in poorer communities that happen to live in food deserts where there's not a grocery store within a walkable mile. There's plenty of fast food places, and so with limited options, limited time, and limited expertise and limited funds, they're definitely going to go towards the easiest alternative, which is fast food, which is unhealthy. Putting something in our tummy. Unfortunately, what we've seen is chronic food insecurity. Those folks that are, again, they're needing those emergency services and they're not eating very well time and time again throughout the month and throughout the year, and chronic health problems, especially diabetes, hypertension, and osteoporosis are absolutely linked. Yeah. And that's simply because of a lack of quality nutrients.
Wow. So this is maybe a much bigger problem than we had imagined.
It's a very big issue, and I frame it in a way of talking about how the United States and Arizona and this country, we have a bad relationship with food. Mm-hmm. We tend to really want everything to be cheap and easy, and to always taste like it's a birthday cake. And, that's not really how normal people eat. And it's really a change of culture, and it's a change of environment, and it's a change of knowledge. And it's a lot of those things that are compounded, yet there is a lot of great work that's doing. And, to give you a shameless plug, the work and the things that you talk about on your podcast, that's part of that shift. And when you have more people that even become more aware of and the magic and illusion around growing food, which for a lot of people, it might as well be like looking at a unicorn. Right, exactly. When you take away that mystery that's behind it, and you realize that even, someone can grow, herbs and cilantro and basil in their own backyard, and so they don't have to buy that stuff that for $4 a little plastic container. Right. Then all of a sudden, it's almost like it's the Wizard of Oz, and you just you look behind the curtain and you realize that oh, it's not that bad. And
Exactly.
It doesn't take that much
That's
time.
a great metaphor, man.
And yeah, and then I also like to say the other great benefit is that it tastes better.
Right.
and,
Oh, yeah.
And and there's a lot of benefits, but it's like if someone were to tell you, the first time someone was to say like, hey, go ride this bicycle, you looked at it and you said that doesn't work.
Right.
No one can
Exactly.
stay up on that thing. But if you go off and try it, and then through a little trial and error, eventually you get it and you realize, gosh, I was meant to do this the entire way. Mm-hmm. To me, that's just growing and eating your own food. And that is one of the big, ways that we can really address food insecurity within this country.
Yeah. So let's talk about solutions. And I have a big, big, big question for you. How do we end hunger?
The $65,000 question.
Yeah.
I get this a lot, and for myself, it's very simple, mm-hmm. and also probably one of the hardest things that we can possibly do. And for myself, ending hunger is as easy as bringing community together. And it's a little counterintuitive. I know that some folks, I say things like that, and usually people are like, well, that's not about growing food and blah, blah, blah. And, really when it comes down to it, there's plenty of food out there mm-hmm. for folks. And if you think of food insecurity and hunger as just starvation, then it's easy. You just get all the food that's not being eaten and you give it to people who don't have any food, mm-hmm. and then you can check the box and everything's done. But that doesn't end hunger. You're still, in fact, in some ways, by only doing that over time, over years and years, you can actually, cause harm for folks. If you, only give someone, fast food and you're ending their hunger for the moment, mm-hmm. you could make them sick over time.
Yeah.
And so by bringing people together, and, it's a lot harder to change how much people earn, or to, increase minimum wages, or to ensure that everyone has the ability to get the best education or to get the best training, and that everyone is happy and healthy in employment and loves their work and all those different things. Those are really big, hard things. And yet I go back to the solution that my mom taught me back in the day, in which, we lived in duplexes with a lot of other families that were
right.
just as poor that we were. And, we would come together once a week and have a big family meal. Mm-hmm. And, they weren't her real families by blood, but they were certainly our families by, the community that we lived in.
Yeah.
And it's in those communities that you can share resources. You can, pull all your money into, to one meal, and you can, share it to where, you have to cook, everything. You have to just bring in one thing. You can, by working together in a community, you can also learn how to cook, and you can build those skills in which you can learn how to, it sounds, silly, but how to boil water the right way, and
right.
how to, make those, those staple things like rice and beans, and, heck, even how to cook an egg and all that good stuff. Mm-hmm. But then you can also share that meal with others. And through that, you can build that sense of emotional support that can give the praise for the student that had the excellent, test, or the excellent, they did their homework the right way, that builds right. confidence for them to want to go back to school. The same thing for someone who got that job promotion, or heck, you can create that space for people to get that encouragement mm-hmm. to say, hey, get out of that job and go pursue something else. But if everyone is eating in their cars, in solitude, sitting in front of a screen, not talking with each other, not caring about each other, and all you're trying to do is consume as many calories as quickly and as cheaply as possible, that just creates not just malnourishment in the technical sense, but a malnourishment of your soul and of community.
Yeah.
Meals were meant to be shared. We break bread with other people.
Yeah.
We don't just break bread just for ourselves.
and we see that every time. You know, I have a party. Where do people end up? They hang out in the kitchen.
Yep.
You know, coming together around
all the
food.
Time. Same here.
Yeah.
And that's where it's fun. That's where life happens. Mm-hmm. And that is to where you can actually in hunger is by creating those communities, those support systems that can not only address the immediate need of starvation, but also create the resiliency to where people have a better relationship with food, and they can cook, they can grow, they can be a better consumer and not say, my neighborhood we deserve a grocery store with good produce that's seasonal and reasonably priced. And, if one person says that, well, they might be screaming into the abyss. Mm-hmm. But if a whole community says that, then, people start listening.
Yeah. Yeah. So in your work at the United Way, what short and long-term solutions are you working on?
Well, we have a two-pronged strategy, mm-hmm. and one is a short-term and the other is a long-term. So my answer was perfectly generated for your question, which I'm glad that worked out that way. So our short-term strategy is to support and maintain the emergency food system. And I had mentioned this, what that meant beforehand, but as a little reminder, it is those food banks, those soup kitchens, congregate meals. It's really to help out with those that intervention and help with people that may be on that brink of starving and not getting connected to those available resources. Right. And that is absolutely critical. We need to have that safety net that's out there. And you'd be surprised, even with that safety net, there is no other more humbling and hardest experience for an individual to cross the threshold of a food bank and ask for help. And we need to create environments, great, efficient, welcoming environments, and we have some of the best in the world right here in Arizona, mm-hmm. that really ensure that those individuals, if they have the courage to walk to that threshold, mm-hmm. they're going to make sure to get that immediate food.
Yeah.
And then, in addition, our second strategy is the more long-term, and that is to develop and implement strategies within communities that address the root causes of hunger. And that's our big systems change kind of work. We know that we just can't build more food banks to end hunger. That's not going to change people's relationships with food. We need to keep our existing ones strong and then use their expertise as a landing pad for folks. And then once that they've become secure, then pivot and use those folks to then engage and co-create solutions in which we can actually address those root causes of why people are needing emergency food, but then address the bigger issues around why people don't know how to grow food, prepare food, even connect with the resources in a more comprehensive way.
Yeah. What kind of work are you doing in the ground? And when I say in the ground, I'm not talking metaphorically. I'm talking about dirt.
Yeah, indeed. Well, one of our strategies that came out of our develop and implement programs in communities, that long-term strategic initiative, is in Maryvale, which is a suburb here in the Phoenix metropolitan area. And to give an idea, in other places, this would be considered a big city, and in Phoenix, this is just considered a little village. Maryvale has a population of about 200,000 people in it.
Oh my gosh!
And it is about 75% of it is Spanish-speaking, and it has a long, rich, beautiful culture and history of folks that have been living there for a long time and having to deal with a lot of hardship and a lot of challenges. And when we wanted to address those root causes of why people are food insecure, and we had data about food deserts and food insecurity and poverty, and we had, every bit of data that would make a little heat map and a little GIS analysis just glow red with need. We decided to go in and engage with that community, and instead of going in there and telling them about everything that's wrong with their community, which is not the best way to start a relationship with anyone,
right.
We asked them about their aspirations, and we asked them about, what kind of community do they want to live in, and what are, the barriers to that community, and what kind of solutions can we co-create to get to that. And I tell you, one of the first ones was they wanted to learn about how to grow food.
Nice.
And so we took that information and we expanded upon it, and we had further focus groups. And what we ended up doing is we got demand from this community to essentially not only learn how to take existing community gardens in a lot of places, and especially in not so well off areas in any urban area, you see a lot of miscreated and misappropriated community gardens. And what I mean by that is you'll have a lot of well-intentioned groups that are trying to do their very best, and they come up with this really great idea, like say, let's build a community garden. And then they look on a map to see like, well, what place needs this? And they just parachute in on a Saturday and don't talk with anyone from the community.
Right.
And they build this garden, and in 4 hours, they have a great time. They go have a great lunch afterwards, give each other's high fives, and then they're done. And the challenge with that is that in some cases they can do some pretty good, but we see in Maryvale and other communities where it's almost like the community comes out and says like, well, what just happened to us? Who were those people, and what is this? And they never had any stake in the ground. They never were asked what you wanted. And so if everything goes south and goes fallow and doesn't work, they don't really care. And so we learned from that, and we engaged with the community to say, well, what if you want to learn how to grow food, what does that actually look like? And so what we ended up doing is, through these focus groups and saying like this is a need, not only did they want good spaces for a garden, but they wanted expanded places that were more urban farms, that were a little higher yield, a bigger kind of garden. They just didn't want to grow flowers. They actually wanted to grow some food. And they also wanted training on how to do that. Growing food in the desert, not as easy than growing food in other places. You can do a lot, but you have to just know what you're doing. And I kind of go back to that riding the bicycle kind of thing. A lot of people look at, growing food in the desert, and they're like, no one can ride that bicycle. But you just have to find someone that and someone who actually does know what they're doing. And eventually, once you know what you're doing, it's like you've been doing it in your entire life. And
right.
So
riding the bike's not so hard.
And then not so hard, exactly. So we are actually in this next calendar year, we have a goal of establishing 15 urban farms within this community, training 2 people per farm, or about 30 people total. And we are looking to work with each one of those sites to where half of that food that they grow will go into the emergency food system, and that goes into that emergency basic need.
Yeah.
But it's now good quality, healthy food that people are growing themselves. I like to say that instead of just doing the canned food drive during Thanksgiving and Christmas, this is a way to do the food drive year round, but now you're growing the food instead of donating the food. Yeah. And then the fourth thing that we're looking to do is how can we then turn the remaining part of that yield into a food hub, to where people can actually then take that product, sell some of that, and then generate a little revenue to then cover some of their costs and create a little bit of a business there.
Yeah.
And from us, that not only addresses that emergency need, it also then addresses the root causes, and hopefully it's something that will sustain itself over time and build capacity within that community.
Yeah. Beautiful. That's well thought out.
I hope so.
So how can our listeners make a difference in their own backyard? Let's go really micro and talk about that.
That's a great question. And I'll just use the same thing, the same things that I preach and the stuff that I do at home. And for myself and my wife, Emma, and my wife is also a preschool teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And we've even done a little garden in her like little schoolyard too. And it's probably the size of maybe your dining room table. It's not that big. It's a really tiny little garden, but we try to definitely practice what we preach. The one thing that I think that we ask people to do anywhere, and especially when it comes to food, are we kind of label it into three things. One, start to grow something.
Yeah.
Don't. It's just try to get something into the dirt and just try it out, and you would be surprised and how easy it is. You'll also be surprised on how birds love to eat tomatoes. I didn't learn that until the hard way, in which I had these beautiful tomatoes that then we fed to the birds, which they enjoyed.
They will do that.
Hey, you should put a net on that.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, net, check. Okay, there we go. But that just takes away some of the mystery.
Yeah.
And we did that with herbs, and we love to cook Italian food, and so just
nice.
basil and rosemary.
Yeah.
And just little things like that. And, we haven't bought basil and rosemary in a really long time.
Yeah.
And every time we go to the store and we look at the prices on basil and rosemary, we're like, oh, gosh, we're so glad that we planted those darn seeds a while ago.
Yeah.
And so that's the one big thing. I think the second thing is cook real food. And that cooking real food is just, there's just something magical about that. And if you have the opportunity to cook real food with others, that could be your date night. That could be your moment of zen. Mm-hmm. That could be your family time. You could do so much with cooking with food. And that is something that you learn so much. You learn problem solving. You learn, and it doesn't have to be the top chef caliber. We're not talking about any of those cooking shows. And that's, no, I mean, you could do even just the bare minimum little things, cooking eggs, and making bread. I haven't bought a loaf of bread in a really long time. I think
nice.
Going over a year.
Wow.
And every Sunday morning, I bake loaves of bread. And it is like going on a long walk in a forest for me. That is my moment of zen for the week. And that is something that costs very little money, ridiculously little amounts of money. And there is nothing, from my opinion, nothing better taste than homemade baked bread. And it's not a big deal, and it's not complicated, and anyone can do it. Yeah. And that also builds confidence that I think is really key. And I'll believe the third thing is ultimately communicate with other people about the issue of hunger and food insecurity, and making that tie between that food that you're growing and the cost of that food, and the time that it takes to make that food, and then consider the folks that maybe have less time. And I even just invite people that if you just worked your normal work day, your normal, Monday or Tuesday, whether you work or you don't, imagine doing your entire, schedule, but you don't have a car and you only have public transportation. And how would that change your day? Yeah. That is how so many folks, especially folks that are food insecure, that are not technically in the poverty zone, but they are still food insecure. And by considering that, and again, as you go back and you think about the time it takes to grow your food and the time it takes to make that meal, that's an important element of, why people don't do that because of that time.
Yeah.
And being mindful in that, and then inviting other people that if you have a neighbor, and, especially in Arizona, where we have a very large senior population, and again, 1 in 7 seniors are food insecure.
Wow.
in this country.
Yeah.
You can actually go off and make a meal with that senior, because maybe they don't have the time to grow the food because of maybe arthritis or, some other kind of issue, or maybe they don't have the time to go shopping. Gosh, wouldn't it be nice to do that with someone else?
Yeah.
That is building that sense of community that not only you're going to feel better at it, but gosh, it's going to make a big difference in your own community.
Big time. I'm going to shift on you, and I'd like for you to talk about a time you failed, how you overcame that failure, and what you might have learned from it.
Indeed. I have enjoyed a long history of trial and error. And I am grateful that I've had that luxury and space to do so. And, I think that there has been, especially in working in human services and working in community, there's a lot of times in which I have gone in with great intentions and having things completely and totally blow up in my face. and you learn a lot from that. And I think that, and again, to keep the cookie metaphors going, one of my favorite expressions from the office is, well, let's see, let's throw against the wall and see if it sticks.
Yeah.
And that's
right.
how my mom used to test if pasta was done. And in working with community, there has been some times in which, before coming to the United Way, in which, as a young kid, fresh out of school and a lot of knowledge, I thought I knew everything because the data told me that this is how all poor people should be. It's almost like looking down at a chart and then looking up at you and saying, well, the data says that you believe in X, Y, and Z, and so I guess it's true. And so because of X, Y, and Z, now I'm supposed to do, A, B, and C to you. Yeah. Do you mind? And you quickly learn that that's just not how to treat people.
Yeah.
And it's not earning respect. It's not demonstrating love with people. And I then reverted, and a big aha for me. And after a few failed attempts and in trying to do that and organizing meetings that no one came to, or, trying a project that failed, I then just reverted back to, as a kid and, lessons that, my mom, taught me, and, other adopted moms and adopted aunts and uncles and adopted brothers and sisters taught me, is that, you have to, treat people with love, and you have to, share and be yourself. And it's, you honor them, whoever they're from, and you take the time to get to know their history and ask questions and always assume the best. And by assuming the best and going in with really positive intentions, wow, you can really get to know someone. And once you get to know someone, that opens the door for the good stuff. Yeah. And that's certainly something that I have learned, that you really have to create that space to get to that big change through powerful relationships. And I tell you, it's slow. It can be a little maddening for some who want that instant gratification. Yeah. Gosh, if you don't put the time into it, it won't be as much fun.
Yeah. Look for the magic. So what do you consider your biggest success?
I think my biggest success is, just being able to do the work I do every day, and heck, even being an advocate and having the luxury of talking about the work that I do, it's, the statistics. And again, it's ironic that, I through my education and my early training in working with people in human services and in hunger work, the statistics basically stated that I shouldn't be talking to you today. The statistics on, a single, a child from a single mother who, died of alcoholism, I shouldn't be, working in this kind of field. I should be doing something else.
Yeah.
And, for myself, it's having the opportunity and enjoying helping and developing other people to where they can be their very best.
Yeah.
And, the things that I'm most proud of, and I consider some of my greatest successes, are when a community takes ownership of something, they feel passion behind a particular project, and they make it their own. And then I can just kind of be that, kind of proud parent on the sidelines, knowing that I helped get them there, but they actually did the work. And we have been, in Maryvale with, the work we've done so far, and to identify projects and to get to a point where we can actually launch some things. Gosh, that's really some of the greatest success I've ever had.
Yeah. Wow. So what drives you?
I have the pleasure of being of the Jewish faith, something I practice and I live. And there is a saying in Judaism called Tikkun Olam, which is to repair the world. And that is always pops into my mind anytime anyone asks me what drives me. And that statement of Tikkun Olam, or to repair the world, is not assuming that the world is necessarily broken. So in some cases, it could be cracked, but it's not full blown broken.
Right.
It's more of like how to create, like, what's your responsibility in maintaining, maybe fixing this world for the next generation that comes after us.
Yeah.
And it's a longer view. It's certainly something that does impose that, there's kind of a lack of ownership. It's not just like, well, how can I make my house really great? It's, gosh, how can I make my house great to where when I'm dead, someone else is going to want this beautiful house.
Right.
And even going so far as to say, it's not just about how to help one person. It's, creating, the infrastructure to where people can, help themselves over generations, and it has nothing really to do for you. That is something that drives me every single day.
Yeah. So any books that have been influential for you in this process in your life?
Oh, so many books. So I was an English lit major as an undergrad, and I still read so many different books. And, I think that the ones that really have motivated me has been works of fiction, because I think that that's where you see great hope and inspiration.
Yeah.
And again, I'm a little nerdy on this, but I was greatly attracted to the English Romantics.
Oh, nice.
And especially Wordsworth and some of those great poets that really tied together the simple beauty of the earth. And then this is going to seem kind of schizophrenic, but I also am a big fan of a lot of those kind of Victorian and kind of modern kind of works of fiction, especially from Charles Dickens and Bronte and Austen and all those different things. It assumes that even with the greatest of intentions, that people can at the same time really, really fail, but also use that failure to be their absolute very best. Yeah. And so I'm just a big fan of those kinds of things. Nice. They kind of serve to really motivate my soul and to kind of ground me to humanity and to the world. And I just realized after hearing everything I just said, I probably sound kind of like a snob. I'm also a big fan of Game of Thrones. So I kind of go the full range. So don't get me wrong. And I read a lot of journals and especially a lot of things around social science. Yeah. And it really, if there's kind of a common thread, I read a lot of Malcolm Gladwell and his essays and books that are out there. Yeah. But really, it's how can we really understand our community and the people that are in our community. And if, you can, works of fiction are great because it allows you to get inside someone's head a little bit and to understand what it's like to be of a certain, gender or race or live in a certain time or these things. And to me, more of those examples is critical so you can ask the right questions and you can connect with people that you may not have the opportunity to connect with.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. So what one final piece of advice do you have for our listeners?
The best bit of advice that I can try to leave everyone with is just get out there and connect with the people in your neighborhood and the people in your community. And by doing that, what I mean by those connections is, you don't have to, go on a full-blown, date with everyone and get married. But gosh, just introduce yourself and create a bond with people and just get to know, their aspirations and, some of their concerns. And that is just absolutely instrumental in how to address those root causes of hunger and of poverty, and even in the issues of malnutrition. And as I mentioned earlier, you don't have to be poor to be food insecure. You don't have to be poor to be malnourished. And a lot of people make those assumptions. And in some cases that's true, and in a lot of cases it's not. And by building those ties and just asking that simple question of how are you, and then waiting for an answer, that goes a long way in building that trust between folks to where if, they are doing great, wonderful, celebrated as a community, because those are big, fun things, and gosh, make a meal together and enjoy life. And if they're not, doing that well, gosh, you know what? Make them some bread, bring over a big bowl of pasta, heck, even, go over and say, hey, have you, I noticed it's a really good time to plant, this vegetable or this fruit. Maybe let's plant something together and, maybe, we can do this together and we can tend to it together, and I can just visit with you once a week. And that's why I'm such a big fan of community gardens and urban farms, because it not only does a lot of good, but it brings people together and it creates the space for growth through community. Yeah. And, with that, gosh, you can do a lot of great stuff, not just addressing the issue of hunger, but that's the kind of place that people want to live in and raise families and die in. And, that's where that magic is.
Nice. Well, Jayson, thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing your experience with us today. It has been a treat getting to chat with you.
It is my absolute pleasure. Thank you.
How can our listeners get a hold of you?
I encourage anyone that's listening to go to the website of the Valley of Sun United Way. You can either Google Valley of the Sun United Way, or you can go directly to our website, which is vsuw.org. And you click on the Hunger tab, and you can read about all the fun stuff we're doing here. And there's also ways to get a hold of me directly. And gosh, I love to talk about this stuff, so don't hold back. We certainly love to talk and to grow together.
Perfect. Thank you. So you can find show notes from today's podcast at urbanfarm.org/PHX United Way. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us on the Urban Farm Podcast. Greg Peterson here, and I want to thank you for listening to the Urban Farm Podcast. We wouldn't be able to keep doing these great shows without you. So as a token of my appreciation, I'd like to offer you access to a list of our top 10 episodes I personally find most inspiring. If you enjoy the Urban Farm Podcast but don't have time to listen to every one, then you will love this list. Although all our guests have great information to offer, if you are short on time, these 10 are must-listens. To get access to the top 10 most inspiring podcast episodes, text FARMER to 44222. That's FARMER to 44222. And enjoy listening.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen 3 days a week for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.